Mr. President, imagine your life cut short. Imagine spending the last 10 years or so of your young life living in a residential aged care facility. You're barely 40, but it's the only place you can receive the appropriate 24-hour care you require. This is the outcome for many who have Huntington's disease. Huntington's is a inherited genetic neurological degenerative condition. There is no cure or effective treatment, and most treatments have adverse side effects that further reduce the person's quality of life. It is not strictly a mental health disorder, although Case Management Tasmania is funded under the DHHS Mental Health Specialist Services. This is often a devastating reality for people to call and be informed the service will be provided for them by the older person's mental health service when they are still young people. Mr. President, Huntington's disease is caused by a defective gene that is passed from parent to child. The child of an affected parent has a 50% chance of inheriting the gene and developing the manifestations of Huntington's disease. The child who does not inherit the gene will not develop Huntington's disease nor transmit the gene to future generations. Huntington's disease does not skip a generation. The Huntington's disease gene interferes with the manufacture of a particular protein known as Huntington, which is crucial for proper brain development. Because of the insidious nature of the disease, symptoms are not usually presented by the person with Huntington's disease. The person often has poor insight into the changes that are occurring. It is more often a close associate or family member who identifies the changes and initiates medical attention. This is often a very difficult time, as the condition often hasn't been diagnosed, and the person suffering from Huntington's disease can often be treated badly, as members of the public often react in ways that increase the suffering to a person with Huntington's disease and their families. As people with the condition start to lose their ability to speak clearly and to slur their words, and to walk with a staggering gait, for example, others often believe them to be intoxicated and treat them accordingly. This can be a very difficult time for people with Huntington's disease and their family and friends. Huntington's Western Australia provides some useful information on their website where the organisation identifies the symptoms and stages of Huntington's disease. And I encourage all members, if they haven't already done so, to visit the website of Huntington's Western Australia for more information, including descriptions of the signs and symptoms. Symptoms can appear at any age, with the average onset age between 30 and 50 years. Physical symptoms are usually the first to cause problems and to be noticed, but at this point they are commonly accompanied by unrecognised cognitive and emotional symptoms as well. According to Huntington's Tasmania, it is most common for symptoms to appear at around the age of 35. Less common is the onset before the age of 20, and the condition is then classified as juvenile Huntington's disease, which progresses faster and with slightly different symptoms. Although symptoms of Huntington's disease vary from person to person, even within the same family, the progression of the disease can be roughly divided into 3 stages: early, middle and late. The Huntington's WA website makes a lot of comment around this, and I'll paraphrase and use some of the words they've used. Early stage Huntington's disease usually includes subtle changes in coordination, perhaps some involuntary jerky movements, it's referred to as chorea, difficulty thinking through problems, and often a depressed and irritable mood. The effects of the disease may make a person less able to work at their customary level, and they may be less able to carry out their regular activities at home. During the middle stage, the movement disorder may become more a problem. Medication for chorea can be considered to provide relief from involuntary movement, but often the medications that are used have little effect, and they often have adverse side effects which actually make some other aspects of the person's condition worse. Occupational and physical therapists may be needed to assist in activities of daily living to help maintain control of voluntary movements and to deal with changes in thinking and reasoning abilities. Diminished speech and difficulty swallowing may require help from speech and language pathologists. Ordinary activities will become harder to do. The Huntington Study Group in the US have also identified that depression and suicide is common within the patient population, with a lifetime prevalence of depression at around 40%. More than 25% of patients attempt suicide at some point in their lives. Clearly this condition needs to be better understood, and care of people with Huntington's disease need to receive appropriate treatment and support. Most people with Huntington's disease exhibit anxiety, a lot exhibit obsessive compulsive behaviour and psychosis, as well as personality changes. Behavioural changes are thought to be caused by a combination of events, including damage to the brain as the disease progresses, and the understandable frustration and depression that people feel when challenged by chronic illness. Huntington's Tasmania identified that middle stage patients require close supervision in the transition to late stage. Consistent individual monitoring by understanding and experienced staff is crucial during this resistant to change period. In the late stage, the person with Huntington's disease is totally dependent on others for their care. Choking can become a major concern. Chorea may be severe. Alternatively, in some cases, stiffness becomes an issue and a problem for these people. In the late stage, the person with Huntington's disease can no longer walk and will be unable to speak. However, the person is generally still able to comprehend language and retains an awareness of family and friends. When a person with Huntington's disease dies, it is typically from complications of the disease, such as choking or pneumonia, and not from the disease itself. Not all people with Huntington's disease experience the same symptoms. Mr. President, when speaking with Pam Cummings and Joyce Ablett from Huntington's Tasmania, they described the end stage for many as starving to death. Swallowing complications often require patients to be fed via a peg or stomach tube, or withdraw from food and liquid intake altogether when swallowing becomes impossible. Death can take up to 3 weeks following no food or liquid intake. And obviously this is a terrible time for the person themselves and their families. Mr. President, I think many of us find these realities difficult to comprehend and understand. Huntington's disease occurs around the world and is not gender selective. Men and women are at equal risk of inheriting the condition. In terms of the prevalence of Huntington's disease, according to the Australian Huntington's Disease Association, New South Wales Incorporated, they say worldwide it's difficult to tell how common Huntington's disease is in a population. In Western countries, it is estimated that about 5 to 7 people per 100,000 are affected by Huntington's disease. There are a few isolated populations in Western Europe where Huntington's disease is unusually common. A very high concentration of Huntington's disease has also been found in the region of Venezuela, where the prevalence is about 700 per 100,000 people. Unfortunately, there's a real dearth of reliable data regarding the prevalence within Australia. The national body is working on this but facing many challenges. It is apparent that there are about 2,000 people throughout Australia with Huntington's disease and approximately 10,000 that are at risk of developing it or having it. This means that for every person diagnosed with Huntington's disease, there could be as many as 5 people at risk. The prevalence of Huntington's disease in Tasmania is estimated to be about 20 people per 100,000, but the anecdotal evidence would suggest it's actually much higher than that. The prevalence is the highest in the northwest of the state. The Australian average is 6 to 7 per 100,000 people, so it's quite a difference. Tasmania has the highest incidence per capita in Australia. An article by S.A. Pridmore, the Large Huntington's Disease Family in Tasmania writes, the prevalence rates of Huntington's disease in Australia mirror those in other countries influenced by Western European migration. Tasmania, with much higher numbers of people with Huntington's disease, is an exception to this. It is believed that Huntington's disease was brought to Tasmania by a woman from southwest England who most likely inherited the gene from her father. The woman arrived in Launceston in 1842 with her husband and 7 children, and then had a further 7 children. 9 of her 14 children developed Huntington's disease, and today 7 of the 9 branches of her family still have living descendants. So how have we allowed the prevalence of this to multiply in our population? Well, some people diagnosed with Huntington's disease may not be aware that they have a family history of the disease. Historically, Huntington's disease was misdiagnosed as a number of other conditions, so many families were unaware of their genetic risk. In other cases, the person carrying the faulty gene may have passed away from other causes of an unrelated condition or by accident, as a result of an accident, before symptoms appear, and therefore the family were not aware. And Mr President, this is particularly, I think, the reason this has been able to continue the way it has in our societies, because of the hideous nature of the disease. It was often kept as a secret by families for fear of being ostracised, and so it was hidden away, and many families were affected, and it just continued on without getting proper genetic counselling and assistance. According to lab tests online, Huntington's disease remains prevalent in the population because of its relatively late onset. Affected individuals are usually asymptomatic during their reproductive years, allowing the mutation to be silently passed on to subsequent generations. And that's the important thing here. People don't know they've got the condition until after they've had their own children. Given Tasmania's higher ratio of Huntington's disease, there should be appropriate 24-hour facilities to care for the middle and late stage Huntington's disease sufferers in a dignified and stimulating environment. Younger persons deserve appropriate age-based care and should not find the only option for them is being cared for in an aged care facility. In a submission to the Senate Community Affairs Reference Committee by Australian Huntington's Disease Association, or AHDA, on the 10th of February 2015, it stated, and there's a few dot points I'll just read from that submission. The average age of all residents in residential aged care has been increasing. At 30 June 2011, 57% of permanent residents were aged 85 and over, up from 50% in 2000. The largest cohort is in the 85 to 89 age range. Stays in residential care are becoming shorter, and residents have a more complex array of health conditions. Against this background, it can be quite devastating for a younger person with Huntington's disease to move into residential aged care facilities. It is true that Huntington's disease can affect a person by making them more self-centred and less aware of their surroundings. Even taking this into account, family and friends find themselves visiting their loved ones in very challenging circumstances. For younger residents with Huntington's disease, aged care facilities lack access to age-appropriate social activities and interaction with the residents' peer group. Ideally, younger residents should have access to an enriched residential environment that gives them some reasonable quality of life. In fact, some recent research is suggesting that an enhanced environment can marginally ease some symptoms of Huntington's disease. Instead, younger people with Huntington's disease are mostly housed with the very elderly. With a lack of specialist ongoing training available for professional caregivers, the nature and quality of care cannot be relied upon. Throughout the course of Huntington's disease, the person may require the skills of a number of different professionals, including suitably trained nursing and care staff, neurologists, psychiatrists, dietitians, social worker, palliative care specialists, to name a few. People with Huntington's disease in aged care facilities are distributed over many individual facilities and across all regions of the country, so that without a clear pathway for specialised nursing and care training, the quality of care delivered is quite variable, despite the best intentions of the institution engaged in delivering the care. Mr President, the Australian Huntington's Disease Association added, for most people with Huntington's disease, the only option where residential care becomes necessary is to move to a residential aged care facility, and a small number of people who are able to access some specialised facilities live in New South Wales, Victoria, South Australia and Western Australia. There is nothing in Tasmania for Tasmanians. So in summary of their submission, the AHDA noted, for over 75% of people with Huntington's disease in Australia, the only option is residential aged care, even though most will be entering residential care, aged care that is, while considerably younger than the threshold age of 65 years. The residential care needs of people with Huntington's disease are well understood. For effective outcomes and the most efficient use of resources, we recommend funding providers who will supply residential care specifically designed for people with Huntington's disease in age-appropriate residential facilities, rather than the current approach of caring for people with Huntington's disease as if they were elderly people. Mr President, it was heartening to hear the state government's announcement a month or two ago of the draft for younger people in residential aged care facility earmarked for Devonport. The Advocate newspaper on the 6th of October reported regarding this announcement that the Chief Executive for Housing and Disability Reform Peter White said, the facility in Devonport will deliver 5 independent units for tenants centred around communal living and will provide a more appropriate option for younger people at risk of entering aged care. There are currently no accommodation options on the northwest that cater specifically for this client group other than residential aged care or supported disability accommodation, Mr White said. Mr President, I've cited the draft proposal and the facility appears to be reasonably well thought out. The draft describes that each unit provides an appropriate environment for the changing requirements of Huntington's disease affected residents, adequate capacity for necessary equipment and provision to access of nearby facilities. So can the government, through the leader, provide an assurance that they will consult closely with key stakeholders such as Huntingtons Tasmania, Aged and Community Services Tasmania and other relevant groups to progress the project and consider all options? The success of the accommodation model relies on the expertise and advice of those who have first-hand experience in providing care, not just the architects, clinicians and departmental representatives. Huntingtons Tasmania advised that they have conducted preliminary discussions with the North West Residential Aged Care Facility regarding a proposal to build a new annex wing to their existing facility for Huntington's disease residents. I understand that the aim of the additional wing would be to provide a more age-suited environment with close proximity to existing support facilities. Working collaboratively with existing models could be a more cost-effective way of providing such services. Mr President, imagine what could be, and we should ask how we can make it better for people who face a very challenging condition and the families who love and support these individuals. I'm sure the leader will make some comment on this matter and I hope the government are committed to establishing appropriate services and accommodation for people with Huntington's disease close to where they live. I was a little concerned to hear that the proposed younger people in residential aged care facility is likely to be built in conjunction with the new Devonport Youth at Risk Response Centre. If this is the case, due to the specific and unique challenges people with Huntington's disease experience, I ask whether adequate security measures have been considered to isolate and separate the properties for safety and security of all residents. And also, are there additional considerations that will need to be taken into account with such a co-located facility? And further, will the government also continue to work with key stakeholders to ensure that those who require specialised care, as younger people with Huntington's disease do in the latter stages of the condition, that they are able to access this in appropriate facilities? So, Mr President, just in closing, to remind members, I'm sure they would be aware, that Huntington's disease is an inherited, genetic, neurological, degenerative condition. Huntington's disease is a lifelong condition. You're born with it, you die with it. There is no cure or effective treatment, and it's often referred to as the cruelest disease of man. And I think, when you understand what it's like, Mr President, I think there'd be no one arguing with that. It is referred to as the cruelest disease of man. It is a very challenging condition for those who suffer with it and for those who love and care for them. It cuts lives short and it's entirely indiscriminate. People with Huntington's disease and their families deserve appropriate facilities to provide the care they need in the latter stages of the condition particularly. I urge the government to work with those directly impacted who have the best knowledge of the challenges they face to make sure this is the case. I look forward to other members' contribution.
The Honourable Member for Emsley.